Greetings. So, when you sit down to read a text for school, the first thing I want you to ask yourself is, what is the purpose of you sitting down to read it? And the purpose will dictate how you read it to some degree. There's some things that you probably will do no matter what, and there are some things that are very distinct to what kind of reading it is. So, for example, if you're sitting down to read a and P textbook, which is when you're going to be memorizing the names of the bones in the hand, which I guess there are a lot of, from what I hear. The goal is memorization and understanding of how these different bones work in conjunction with one another. And that's kind of the purpose of the reading. And so highlighting as you go the key concepts is a totally appropriate thing to do. You're sort of trying to push aside the things you don't have to memorize or understand versus the parts that you have to know. When you sit down in an English class or a history class or anthropology class or many, many different other kinds, art history, international studies, the purpose is different most of the time. And so you don't want to take out the highlighter and start highlighting key terms unless the whole purpose of your reading is to be tested on it. But oftentimes they want you to think about different questions, issues. This is true for sociology as well. You're going to be debating and discussing these things in class. You're going to be writing papers on them. And at that point, the highlighter is not going to be, if you're just highlighting, it's not going to be working too much to your advantage. So, how might you engage with it if you're not just going to be looking for key terms? And the other thing that teachers always want you to do is just be able to summarize. And summarizing also has its limits. So it's good to be able to summarize a chapter that you just read. But again, that's about did you get the main points? Okay? So if the teacher's interested in you sort of critically engaging or creatively engaging with the text, then I think there are other skills that you want to practice. So ask questions, look for bias or assumptions or charged language in what you're reading. Look for what's not in the text at all, like what don't they talk about? And write down anything that you notice about the text. And when I say text, it could be a play, it could be a photograph, it could be a chapter in an art history book with paintings in it. So anything that you notice that you don't think anyone else is going to. So all those perceptive, weird ideas that go through your head as you're reading, write those down as well. And then any patterns that you notice, like let's say you're looking at a bunch of Vermeer paintings and you notice that the light always comes in from one angle. Well, write that down. The lighting is always from this part of the painting. Now, I've only given you 5, and there's countless ways to critically engage with whatever you're reading. This is just to get you started. If I give you too many, none of them will stick, and you'll just sort of fade out. And so I'm mostly interested in you practicing a couple. So if you had to practice 3, I would say ask questions, look for what's not there in the text, and write down anything that you notice that you don't think anyone else in the class is going to notice, no matter how big or small. Sometimes it's really obvious and it's so obvious that people kind of don't even take it in. Okay, when you ask questions, I have to say that there are different kinds of questions, and 2 out of the 3 are fine. The third one, not so fine. So there are questions that have factual answers to them. So what is the capital of Oregon? There's not much debate about it. There's one right answer, and as you read, you're going to have a lot of questions that have one answer for. Like, what's this word mean? Or what's it mean? You might think, like, are Kurds and non-Kurds, Turks, are they both Muslims? They either are or they aren't. They're either both Muslims or they aren't. Or sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't. So, you know. Then there's the ones that English teachers are way interested in, where questions that have no right or wrong answers. Like, you need to answer the first kind of question in order for you to proceed. Like, you need to know, when did Kurosawa die? Or when did he make his last film? Like, okay, so you need to know that. But it's not, you're not going to write a great paper on that. It's this here where there's no right answer. Those questions are going to lead to interesting paragraphs and thesis statements and all that. So the third kind I would like you to put aside, and that's when you ask a question where embedded in the question, and it often sounds a little sarcastic or a little ironic in you asking it, where you kind of already know the answer before you even ask it. Whether you do or not, who knows, but you think you know the answer. So, like, you might ask, let's say we listen in class to a NPR piece, and you hear this dude, and you think he's a total idiot. And so you ask, like, how long has this guy been a police officer anyway? And embedded in that is he couldn't have possibly been a police officer for very long, and if he was, he's a total idiot because he should know this thing that he obviously doesn't know. So you sort of come at it with this attitude or this sort of judgment or know-it-all sort of sense, and I think questions are the best if they're very neutral. Because you're starting out, it's a place of inquiry, right? You don't want to start out kind of assuming too much because you want to explore. So notice the difference between, like, why do not many community college students complete their 2 years? It's very neutral. I mean, it's factually that only a certain percentage do, and you're not kind of assuming anything about that process. Okay, so I think I've said enough about the questions. Now, let's actually work with a text. This is a text that is optional for writing 122. And in this, just to give you some context, this guy is talking about charities or NGOs in Ethiopia. The whole book is about that. And he's wondering when NGOs become more trouble than they're worth. He's sort of exploring this, and he's just trying to figure it out. So he's exploring all sides. And at some point, this chapter is about the period when suddenly there are a lot of NGOs, both ones that are funded from outside of Ethiopia and ones that are funded within Ethiopia. And the government tries to put some control on those. And they basically say no more international NGOs. Okay, so that's what this particular chapter is about. Now, as you read, in the beginning he's talking about driving with a group of people, and they've been up in the hills or mountains, and they come down into a valley for a little bit before they go up. And when they're in the valley, I guess that valley has just gotten some major floods, and so all the people who live there sort of are coming out to the roadside to show people how many people died and, you know, how devastated they are. And the journalist who wrote this book, he just wants to get to their destination. And the aid workers, they are a little bit more sympathetic to the people that they're passing. They actually stop and talk. So remember I said that there's the kind of question that has a factual answer. Waddle and dub, or dub, is one of those. Like you may write in the margin, what does this mean? And at some point, if it really matters, you can look it up. But you may not want to stop to look it up then. So one of the things about reading a difficult text is deciding when you're going to break the flow of your reading and when you're not. And since I kind of break my own flow a lot, I don't go off looking things up in Wikipedia or in the dictionary until like later, unless it becomes super important. So I actually wouldn't look this up now. I would save it. I would make the note now, but I actually wouldn't look it up. So he's talking about stopping and talking to the people, and one thing he realizes is that the fellow aid workers who he's with in the Jeep or whatever he's in, they showed more humanity. They wanted to stop, and they promised they'd come back and help the people, and he kind of was focused on his little end goal. And he says, my companions from a local community organization showed more humanity than he did. So when I read this, I start to think about the second kind of question. So the thing I would write probably like on a separate sheet of paper is, why does he start the chapter this way? And I have some more thoughts. And I either will write them down, or if I think I'll remember them, I won't write them down. Like I could also write down and this would fall into what I noticed that I'm not sure anyone else would notice. Like he starts out with this portrait of the aid workers as somehow positive and more generous than he is, and why does he do that? Like he's obviously wants to paint them in a positive light. He could have chosen, he was probably in Ethiopia for months, and he could have chosen an episode where the aid workers were kind of jerky or corrupt, but he chose to choose this really positive example to start the chapter. So why did he do that? I wonder. So then I read a little bit further, and he says that the people in the car with him were from this NGO called the Community Develop Initiative. And then a little bit later he says that that initiative is funded by Oxfam America. And so then I think this is a positive outside, and by outside I mean funded, NGO. So for some reason he not only wants to show that they were quite warm and empathetic, but that they were funded from an outside organization. And I'm not going to assume already that he's biased towards outside organizations. It's too early for that. And this is something that's super important. And it's true for only some of you, that some of you like leap instantly to a judgment, but I don't even mean a judgment. You leap to a conclusion too quickly. And what I want you to do is just kind of make notes, raise the questions, and then see how something pans out. Because if you don't leap to a conclusion so soon, you may find that you actually reach a different conclusion if you just stay open. Okay? And you know yourself well enough if you tend to do that. There's a whole, it's like 20 to 40% of any class, people like, that's just part of their personality, or life has taught them that it's best to do that. So in this case, when you're reading this kind of text, just write down little questions, write down little observations, and then when you're at the very end, then you can see if what you thought might be happening is indeed happening. Okay, so I think that's about it. I want to say that every text is difficult in its own way, and that this text, it's difficult not in terms of the words that are used. For the most part, it's not. The difficulty, he's a fairly accessible writer. It's difficult in that he's talking about a lot of things that you've never heard of. So, Oxfam America, Oxfam, UK. He's going to talk about the Labour Party in, London, and all these things you probably have no experience with. So it's going to be challenging for you to stay firm in spite of all these things that are new to you. Okay? So, ask questions, make astute observations, look for patterns, look for what's not mentioned in this chapter at all. And what all these things do is they just kind of actively connect you to the text. It's hard, you're not used to doing it, and if you can do this even a little bit, I promise you I'll know it and recognize it. Okay, just try. Good luck.